Hello everybody and welcome back to another video from the Theory of Racelessness. Before the clip, we have some very exciting news. Dr. Sheena Mason, Dr. Carlos Hoyt, and Greg Thomas present Resolving the Racism Dilemma, a full-day conference coming up this September 24th, 2022. Register using the link in the description box down below to experience these leading voices as they explore and discuss how to correct the misguided notions of race. Now, enjoy the video.
I think race is so easily glommed onto, I think, by the human brain that loves to categorize and so encourage, by the way that we do society, at least in this country, that getting rid of it would be like trying to eliminate the common cold, right? I think we are so susceptible to thinking in terms of categories and hierarchies, and race matches onto that so well, even though it's not empirically real, that we're not going to ban it. Like, it's just not going to happen. So the best we can do, at least in the short term, is recognize our susceptibility and do the best we can to, quote unquote, inoculate ourselves against it, right? A habit to be resisted, maybe not to be eliminated right away. So how do we correct? One, going back to our bit of a talk about empathy, we honor and have compassion for our vulnerability, to see each other in all sorts of ways that sometimes lead to positive things, pride and solidarity and all those things, but also, and this is the other edge, serve as a way to divide and lead to all sorts of hostility. We have to understand that we are always, if not deep into that, a step away from falling into it. It's just the way the human brain works, and it's supercharged to do that because of some social conditioning that we've had. So let's correct all the time. How do we do that? I'm an educator. We start with kids. We build on their already sort of natural philosophical bent and their ability to take in information without some of the contamination that comes as they grow up. And we get them to think critically about things. One of the things that is in at least one of my videos, more show and tell, involves these things, right? And I think it's in the TED Talk, right? They have numbers on them, et cetera, et cetera. And I've had so much fun with these jars with kids as young as 3 and 4, with just the basic questions. What do you see? Which two are more alike? What do you think is actually in here? Now that you know what's in here, which two are like? And then the sort of dawning, right? Oh, I ought not to judge things just by their surface appearance, which is such a fundamental and maybe even simplistic message, but it's at the basis of, I think, is what's problematic for us. And that's what we need to correct for. And it doesn't obviously just apply to race. If I, having been conditioned, to be a male thinking person in this society, am interacting with you consciously or unconsciously based on, the optics that tell me, well, you must be female identified, which means what, et cetera, et cetera. If that's humming somewhere in the back of my brain, it's probably influencing, what I'm thinking and maybe even what I'm saying, whether I know it or not. I know that I'm susceptible to that, right? So I try to be anyway, on guard, for any negative effects of that. Some of them might even seem to be positive, right? So I tend to be a protector and a superhero, and that probably shows more with people who seem to be female identified than male identified. Like, I have all that conditioning in me, right? I just want to acknowledge that and then figure out, what do I do with that? I would love to eliminate it and just be neutral in all regards, but I don't think it's possible. All right. So I'm going to do my best to be disciplined against the bad things that could happen coming out of that. And that's what I mean when I talk about correctivism.
Yeah, great. So let's talk more about this. My mind is going pew 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 pew. It's firing. So Pierce talks about retentionism, revisionism, and eliminativism, and all three of those categories speak to what a person thinks should be done with the concept of race. The language that I prefer to use from my mentor, the chair of the philosophy department at Howard University, would be conservationism, which obviously is the same as retentionism. Yeah. Eliminativism, that holds the same around the way. Revisionism, reconstructionism is what I use. So I was wanting you to definitely call on the language that you use so that we could share information. Like there are other ways to describe the same thing. I think in terms of when you're talking about what I'll call Reconstructionism is spot on. It's what I tell people. It's that in American society, there are default philosophical positions that we're really primed to subscribe to. And I think the irony that comes with a constructionist, reconstructionist position is that it always gets packaged as progressive, it gets packaged as liberatory, it gets packaged as a form of resistance. But when you know more in depth the history of the concept of race in the first place, and you know that the iterations, as you say, it has never been stagnant, it has constantly been under reconstruction, and yet and still centuries later, if we see that the concept is still operating, although understood in somewhat different ways, still operating in ways that are nefarious, the reason for that, the primary reason why Reconstructionism falls short of the actual goal of liberation from racism is because we are in reconstructing, really working to reconstruct racism, which kind of sounds nonsensical if I put it in those in that language, because as you said, it's really about getting to the root of the weed. And I love that you call it a weed. Instead, I've used the root metaphor often, but I'm always thinking of a tree. Like I'm not thinking of a weed, but I think a weed makes perfect sense. And so I'm going to borrow that and cite you moving forward. Yeah, I think getting to the root of the problem is really what has been a hindrance in the context of the United States in terms of transcending this thing called racism. And part of my sincere belief in eliminativism is because when I hear constructionism, and as you describe it, I hear reconstruction, but just packaged slightly differently. And I would argue that eliminativism, while it is a bit of a misnomer because it suggests that an eliminativist such as myself believes that we could actually completely eradicate the concept, thereby completely eradicating racism. And I don't believe that is necessarily true. Certainly, I think if we get to a point of especially focusing on the youth and not teaching them racism in the first place, because we're all taught race, which means we're taught racism because it comes hand in hand, really. If we can get to the root of that with our young people and start to stop teaching them race and teach them about racism, but teach them about race through the properly, redirected subject of racism, like we're examining race as a sort of historical concept that we no longer subscribe to, or that we recognize now that we don't have to subscribe to, and actually all of us in this room are raceless, and we encourage young people of in high school who've already globbed onto the American concept of race and the fanaticism and obsession with color and all of that, to de-racialize themselves. That work is necessary, and that work I think will go a long way toward the ultimate goal of eliminativism, because at some point, just as the majority of our society came to subscribe to this particular ideology, we can reverse engineer the same thing. We can't if we don't believe that we can, but we can, and we start with the young people, and across a couple generations, I do think it would be eradicated, and you might have a very small percentage of people who are really intent on maintaining their racist ideas or the racist ideology, but that ultimately it would be a very small percentage of people. And we don't actually need the we don't need every single person to be an eliminativist to achieve eliminativism, because really what, as I look at it anyway, it's about the statistical majority of people being an eliminativist, and then the policies and the procedures and the ways of the land, right, will come to inevitably reflect the majority, and that over time will lead to a more absolute societal structure where, again, it's like a tiny percentage of people who are just really intent on holding on to the thing called race.
We hope you enjoyed that highlight. To watch the full version, use the link in the description box down below. Before we go, here's another reminder for Resolving the Racism Dilemma with Dr. Sheena Mason, Dr. Carlos Hoyt, and Greg Thomas. We highly encourage you check out the great things being offered at this conference, September 24th. All of the conference information is linked down below. We hope to see you there.